call, please, Madam Clerk.
Good afternoon. Let the record reflect Supervisor Parker, Alejo, Phillips, and Adams are appearing via video conference, and Chair Supervisor Lopez is appearing in person.
Thank you. Can we get the announcement of the interpreter, please?
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es María, estoy aquí para los servicios de intérprete en español.
Thank you, Maria. I want to remind the public we will be taking public comment not just here in the chambers but via Zoom. In order to make your public comment, what we'll ask that you do is go into the Participants tab on Zoom. At the very bottom of that, there's a raise hand function, and please click that if you would like to be recognized to speak. If you're on a landline that does not have the controls as we see, please do me a favor and punch *9. That'll do exactly the same thing and let us know that you'd like to be recognized to speak. Again, Participants tab, raised hand, or *9 from a landline or cell phone to be recognized. We have also been having some technical difficulties with folks reporting that they're hearing very quiet report out from folks here in the chamber. If you would do us a favor and just make sure that your speakers are turned up. We think we've addressed the issues on our end, but please check your speakers or your headphones before calling in, but we appreciate you guys continuing to participate. At this time, we're going to continue with our 1:30 scheduled matters, which begins with a public workshop to consider a draft evaluation system program, including a draft procedural manual, and that is going to be presented by Ana Cuenga, Senior Planner.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Lopez and Board of Supervisors. Ana Cuenga and Brandon Swanson, RMA Planning staff, here to present on the Development Evaluation System, also known as the DES. Because this presentation is a workshop, it will run a bit longer than typical presentations. The draft ordinance and manual have been provided with the staff report for information only. Staff does not seek direction by the board today. Prior to beginning our presentation, I would just like to confirm with the clerk of the board that you'll be running the PowerPoint for us on Zoom. Is that correct?
We sent out an email yesterday saying that all presenters would be showing their own slides. Did you send it to us?
I did send it to you.
If Julian could pull it up, we could do it for this one time.
Okay, I apologize.
Give us 1 minute or 1 second.
Sure.
Hold on.
Thank you. Once again, Ana Cuenga with RMA Planning staff here to present on the Development Evaluation System. Next slide, please. During today's workshop, staff will touch upon background information and go over the nuts and bolts of the DES program. Staff is seeking direction from the board to finalize the program and draft ordinance. Once finalized, staff will conduct the appropriate environmental review, bring the program back to the Planning Commission for recommendation, and then return to the Board of Supervisors for your final approval. Next slide, please. Focusing development in certain areas of the county was found essential to planning infrastructure, public services, and affordable housing. Community areas and rural centers and affordable housing overlay districts were identified as priority development areas due to existing services and infrastructure available and or a county commitment to provide such services and infrastructure. In response, policy LU 1.19 was created. Next slide, please. Policy LU 1.19 requires special evaluation of certain developments outside of community areas, rural centers, and affordable housing overlay districts. The purpose of the DES is to be a systematic, consistent, predictable, and quantitative evaluation tool for decision makers, such as the Planning Commission and/or the Board of Supervisors. In addition, residential developments subject to the DES are required to provide additional affordable housing. Next slide, please. Projects applicable to the DES are those that create 5 or more new lots or units, or have an equal to or greater than traffic, water, or wastewater intensity as 5 new lots or units. Projects will be evaluated at 3 major milestones of the application process. The preliminary evaluation will occur before the formal application is made, allowing applicants to modify their project prior to 100% commitment and a substantial investment. The second evaluation will occur during the 30-day review of an application, and project planners will provide the application with their score once the project has been deemed complete. The third and final evaluation will occur after the CEQA analysis has been completed. The score will be provided to the decision makers for their consideration. Once they are finalized, staff proposes the DES regulations be adopted by ordinance and the manual explaining the ordinance be adopted by resolution. Next slide, please. The general plan identifies the importance of agriculture in our county. In support of the agricultural industry and affordable housing for ag workers, staff proposes a DES exemption for agricultural subdivisions, long-term affordable agricultural employee housing, and certain developments located within the Ag Wine Corridor Plan. Projects qualifying for an exemption will be required to meet a 3-part test. The project must be one or more of the identified development types on the slide, meet all measurement criteria, and agree to record a restriction on their property as specified in the draft ordinance. If all 3 are not met, the project shall be subject to the DES. Next slide, please. Projects subject to the DES would be evaluated similar to how exemptions work. The evaluation guide identifies criteria or project components for which projects would be measured against. In order for a project to qualify for a score, evidence documenting how the project meets the criteria will need to be submitted. In some cases, the applicant would have to agree to a condition of approval as an assurance. Next slide, please. Policy LU 1.19 requires the DES to be a pass-fail system. Based on input from the public and the Planning Commission, a passing score of 70 points or more has been established. In this case, pass-fail does not mean approval denial. Since projects subject to the DES require discretionary approval, staff interprets pass-fail to mean that a project planner would quantify a project score using the evaluation and provide this information to the decision maker for their consideration. The Planning Commission has recommended that failing projects be brought before the appropriate hearing body with staff's recommendation of denial. In any case, it would be up to the decision maker whether to approve or to deny a project. Next slide, please. Since the DES program will be a new process, staff has developed an accompanying manual. This manual explains the ordinance but does not serve as a replacement to the regulations. It is a tool to provide examples and the necessary forms needed for the DES submittal package. Next slide, please. Once staff receives comments and direction from the board, the draft DES will be finalized and staff will conduct the appropriate environmental review. The type of environmental review required would dictate the amount of time needed to return to the Planning Commission for board recommendation. Once that occurs, staff will then return to the board for approval of the ordinance and approval of the manual by resolution. Next slide, please. Before we conclude our presentation, Staff would like to point out that a letter from Lombardo and Associates was submitted for this item. Since we're here only for board direction, finalizing the regulations is still a work in progress. If it is the desire of the board, staff is prepared to address this letter at this time. Staff is prepared for any other questions if you have any.
Any questions from board members? I see no hands going up. I'll take it to the public. Any public comment on this item? Mr. Lombardo.
I don't know how I sound talking through the mask. Okay. Maybe some would prefer I left it on. I don't know. Good afternoon, Chair Lopez, members of the board, Anthony Lombardo. We made similar comments to the Planning Commission. The staff is obviously following the direction set forth in the general plan. There's no criticism of staff. However, as you can see from the complexity of a 43-page procedures manual, as well as the questions that we've raised, that I think that deserves some additional analysis by the staff and some examples given to the Board of Supervisors. Monterey County is probably one of the most difficult and expensive jurisdictions to process development applications through, and adding this additional layer of complexity is only likely to compound that problem. And so, for example, looking at this in relation to a pending project that has apartment proposed to be included in the development, this would require that there be a 40% affordable component or 35% affordability component, or it wouldn't receive a passing score. Well, no private development could do 35% below market housing, so you're effectively going to diminish your housing stock if you proceed as proposed now. In any event, just some questions, food for thought, and we'll be back at some point, so the staff does not have to address those today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other folks in the room wish to comment on this item? Seeing nobody coming forward, I'm going to turn and look at our public participating via Zoom. Any comments for this item? Seeing no hands being raised there, I'll bring it back to this board, and I see Supervisor Adams has her hand up.
And her mute button off. Thank you. Thanks very much. And thanks, staff, for the work that you have done on this. Honestly, this ordinance and the procedure manual have been in the works for a very, very long time. And I know that it's really, really complex. It's been worked on by staff over the years and by the Planning Commission as well. And while the whole idea is really quite complex, I think it's really important that we just get this done. I don't think it's the time to reopen, a lot of issues that took place over the general plan, which was approved 10 years ago, and it's time for another one now. But a couple of questions that I did want to ask is, why is there the possible need for additional environmental review now that you indicated in the process that we would be going through of the ordinance? I thought that this would have been covered by the EIR over the whole general plan.
Through the chair? Oh.
Staff, yes.
Sorry. Yes, if Anna Kinga for the record again. Once the ordinance is finalized, then we'll know exactly what the proper environmental analysis would be. As you pointed out, we could rely on the general plan EIR if that is appropriate in that situation. There are other things that could occur. We might be able to tier off of the general plan EIR, but it depends on, and once we finalize the ordinance, then we'll know the appropriate CEQA review.
Okay, and then I'm just wondering if there is any way to simplify the process. I think that the manual is really terrific, but I'm just wondering if it might be possible for us to come down with like a 2-page executive summary sort of handout that we could give to people, so they didn't feel that every time they got into the DES, it was just going to be this monumental effort. When, though complex, if we could just, sort of bring it forward in a way that would be a lot more user-friendly, as I suggested, perhaps just sort of an executive summary of the procedural manual. What do you think?
Through the chair?
Yep.
Anna Kinga again. Yes, staff would be open to make the process, easier for everybody, we couldn't come up with an executive summary or a brochure that we can hand out just to get everybody familiar with it. And then they'll know what to look for once they really go into the manual and go into the process.
Right, and they could use that during their whole, during the whole process, right? It would have enough information that they could use it as like a short form kind of thing.
Sure.
And then finally, just from my own perspective, I know that there was some suggested language change, a very minor change that clarified a couple of things about the decision-making, the pass-fail, and I would be supportive of that language being included as well.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly go over. I saw Brandon Swanson had his hand up. I don't know if he wanted to chime in on this item as well. Brandon, did you have an additional comment for this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I think that it got answered. I was just going to speak to the sort of like 2-page writer that would go with the document, but I think Ms. Kenga did a wonderful job answering that question. Thank you.
Thank you. I also saw Supervisor Phillips had his hand up. I want to see if you want to talk on this item, Supervisor.
I'm just trying to get on, but it does look like a pretty complex, convoluted process, frankly.
So today, one more time, Anna, could you let us know what you're looking for today?
Yes, thank you. So just to wrap it up, based on the information presented today, staff is seeking direction to move forward. If there are glaring inaccuracies or if additional information should be part of the ordinance or part of the manual, staff would like the board to give us the direction to either include that or how to proceed. We understand it is complex. It is implementation of a general plan policy, so unfortunately it is necessary. And we just look forward to finalizing this ordinance and moving forward. So any direction you'd like to give us, we're totally open. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could add just a little bit to that. This is Brandon Swanson again with RMA Planning. I think the general point of what we're looking for, and Supervisor Adams gave us a great example of what we're looking for, not only with requesting some sort of executive summary or 1 or 2 sheets that to clarify the manual, but also I did hear that Supervisor Adams would be supportive of adding specific language in the ordinance or whatever the implementation document is, that this is not a decision-making tool. This is just information for the decision makers. So that's the kind of feedback we're looking for today, is clarification that you would like to see in the ultimate document or ordinance, and anything that we could do to make it more palatable or usable for the ultimate decision makers.
I'm supportive of both those comments. Supervisor Alejo, I see your mute is off. Would you like to make some comments? Okay. Any additional input from board members? Seeing none, I think we've given some direction. So thank you, Anna, and thank you, Brandon. As crazy as that was, we look forward to seeing what you'll bring back. We know it's not an easy task, but we appreciate all that you do. So with that, we're going to head into item 11, which is to consider the 2019 annual progress report for the Monterey County General Plan and consider the progress report for the 15 to 23 housing element.
All right, thank you. Fortunately, I have my PowerPoint here on my computer, so I can pull it up. Good afternoon, Chair Lopez and Supervisors. Brandon Swanson with RMA Planning, here today to present the 2019 annual report on the general plan and the housing element. Annually, counties in California must prepare a report to provide the status of the general plan and progress in its implementation, evaluate that progress in meeting the regional housing needs allocation, or what we all know as RHNA, and list sites around the county owned by the county and included in the inventory of land in the housing element that have been either sold, leased, or otherwise disposed of in the previous year.
Annual progress report for the Monterey County General Plan.
For Monterey County, annual reports are required for both the 2010 General Plan, which is our inland general plan, and the 1982 General Plan, which is our coastal general plan. RMA is the lead for preparing the annual report on general plan implementation, and the CAO Housing Office is the lead for the annual report on the 2015 to 2023 housing element. I'm going to start this presentation by going through the numbers relevant to the housing element. As you can see up on your screen here, these are the numbers broken down that will be transmitted to the state. 223 units were added in 2019 to our arena. 8 of those were moderate and 215 were above moderate. 90 planning permits were processed. 68 of those were single family dwellings, 7 accessory dwelling units, and 15 projects with 5 or more units. Included in that 5 or more units is our 7 employer sponsored projects for a total of 112 beds. There were 227 building permits processed and 245 certificates of occupancy. You see that number down there again for projects with 5 or more units. That also includes a 24 unit inclusionary employer sponsored project. During 2019, no county owned sites were sold, leased, or otherwise disposed of. The CAO Housing Office staff is available for this presentation if there are questions at the end, so we can come back to them if you have any follow-up questions on the housing element. That takes us to the general plan portion of this. The main purpose of these annual reports is to detail what has been accomplished over the prior year. In 2019, there were no amendments processed for the 2010 general plan that were listed in our 2019 work plan. If you recall, last year and years before, we come to you with a work plan for the next year, what we intend to do from a long-range planning perspective. So in 2019, there were no amendments on that work plan that were processed. There were, however, some minor amendments that were made to local coastal programs under the 82 general plan. All of those, however, were focused on cannabis. Despite not processing any amendments fully, staff did make progress on several of the items that were listed as priorities on that 2019 long-range planning work plan. Additionally, staff accomplished several tasks that were assigned as a priority, but were not part of the 2019 work plan that was presented to the board last year. The following slides I'm going to go through will detail the 2019 work plan that was presented last year, as well as the additional priorities that were assigned over and above that. So in front of you have the 2019 work plan summary. This was presented last year at the board. Accomplishments and progress was made, but no general plan amendments were fully processed. So on the progress side of things, we've got the Moss Landing Community Plan. We completed all of our workshops at the Planning Commission on the individual policy items. So that's going to allow us to get the draft forward to not only the Planning Commission, but the board as well in 2020. The DES, we completed all of our Planning Commission workshops. That allowed it to get to the board today in 2020. That actually represents, as you know, a general plan item LU 1.19. The CR Free project, the EIR was certified in 2019. Vacation rentals, or as we know them as short-term rentals, draft of the ordinance was completed and circulated, and a final PC workshop was held, which again will allow that to get in front of the decision makers this year in 2020. We've also had our landscape ordinance. We held stakeholder meetings as was directed by the board. Now we've got some other items here that have not seen progress in 2019. The Salinas Valley groundwater investigation. There were some models that were delayed. The county has been working with the USGS to get those models working and anticipate some progress this year in 2020. The ag land mitigation program, no progress was made on that due to staff resource constraints. Community climate action plan, again, no progress because of a vacant coordinator position, although I'm happy to say that the CAO's office has filled that sustainability manager position, so that's a very positive move. And then zoning map updates, no progress, again, was made due to staffing resource constraints. So that brings me to the next slide here. On top of the limited staffing issues that we've had, these additional priorities were assigned in 2019, which kept staff from processing general plan implementation items. Following is a list of those tasks. As you're all aware, cannabis regulations, there were multiple ordinance amendments last year in 2019 that were processed. In addition to that, hemp regulations, there was a creation of a new program and adoption of an ordinance for a pilot program in 2019. Fort Ord East Garrison, RMA is the lead for East Garrison processing. And on top of that, working with FORA and County Council and other departments towards the dissolution of FORA in June, at the end of June this year. So that took up a lot of time in 2019 as well. Airport land use compatibility plans, these are important documents. We processed 2 of those locally, one for the Monterey Regional Airport and one from the Marina Municipal Airport. Our county mitigation monitoring and reporting program, This is the program we come forward every year that governs how we keep track of our mitigation program. This came out of the Leaper settlement. In 2019, staff processed a major overhaul to the program in collaboration with County Council and SOPC to make it a better system that not only was more understandable, but also more achievable, so that we are reporting on things that actually matter. That was a big move and a very important thing for us to keep the county in the right direction on our mitigation monitoring reporting program. Proof of access ordinance was brought forward and amended to be in chapter 16.80. This makes it operable in the coastal zone. Up until that point, the proof of access ordinance, or as some know as the private road ordinance, was not in the coastal zone at that point. The Big Sur land use plan update, multiple community meetings and a final draft were completed in 2019. RMA updated our land use fees to make it a tiered schedule, more user friendly for the public and easier to understand what your fees are going to be, and also allows us to better capture for services that are actually being rendered. Mixed use ordinance draft was started, which will ultimately help with affordable housing and increased opportunity for commercial development mixed with residential development in the county. And then lastly, we stood up our Native American and ARC Resource Tech Advisory Panel. The appointments were actually made in 2020, but in 2019, we laid the groundwork, sending out solicitations for people that wanted to be involved in that qualified. This actually also represents a general plan implementation item. So you can see there were still a lot of accomplishments in 2019. So that takes us to 2020, our work plan. These are the things that we want to accomplish, plan to accomplish, and will accomplish in 2020. We've got our DES program. You just saw that today. So as you know, the next step is for us to do CEQA analysis and then come back through the Planning Commission for a formal recommendation to the board. Our goal is to get that adopted through the board this year. Same with the ADU ordinance, that's getting it updated to be in line with the state regulations that changed this last year. Mixed use ordinance and landscape ordinance, both of those we hope to bring to the board for adoption. Big Sur land use plan update that will be brought to the board for approval. Ultimately, that will have to go to the Coastal Commission, just like the Moss Landing Community Plan, which will have to go to not only the board, but the Coastal Commission. Chular Community Plan, you may recall last year in 2019, the RMA received, and the RMA in coordination with the CAO Housing Office received a grant for SB2 funding, which are planning dollars that will help forward affordable housing. We have some projects on here that will be funded by that money that we have planned to accomplish in 2020. One of those is starting work on our Chular Community Plan, which is very important. It's an area of our county that needs some help. And so we're looking forward to getting started on that in 2020, as well as the Castroville Community Plan impact fees, redoing the Nexus study to potentially lower the impact fees because there's many projects in the Castroville Community Plan that will not be done in the future. And then lastly, vacation rental ordinance, or STRs. The goal is to bring that to the board for an approved draft and get it onto the CEQA process in 2020. So that takes us through the 2020 work plan. I would like to mention that in getting into the 2020 work plan and coming out of the 2019 work plan, to help improve progress for our planned tasks, RMA has created a priorities matrix for our agency. This matrix will allow our director to manage the department priorities and also communicate with the board regarding resources available and priorities as assignments come up throughout the year, which they often will, to be able to have a realistic conversation about where resources can be put, given that they are limited. So that takes me to the end of the presentation. I am available for questions if there are any. Thank you.
Questions from members of the board? Get my participants tab up here. Supervisor Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation and the report in our packet. When we adopted the general plan, there were many ordinances that needed to be drafted and implemented or approved. Where are we in the overall list? I didn't see, maybe it was referred to somewhere in the materials, but I didn't see it clearly laid out.
Yeah, the number, thank you through the chair, Supervisor Parker. The number is obviously the same, unfortunately, as it was last year. So we have not changed that number. I believe the remaining is 55, I believe was the number last year.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions from supervisors at this point? Seeing no hands going up, I'll go to the public. Is there anybody in chambers who'd like to speak to this item?
My name is Sherwood Darrington. I'm the Executive Director of the Ag Land Trust. Just want to speak to the section of the report that deals with the Ag Land Mitigation Program. Back in 2016, we provided a lot of input to the staff in their effort to draft the ordinance, and we just want to make sure that they're still aware that we're still an available resource that we would provide to the staff in their efforts. We were established in 1984 as a Ag Land Trust, the second one in the state of California. And since that time, we recorded some 99 transactions covering just under 50,000 acres, mostly farmland in the Salinas Valley. We're currently working on 25 different projects that'll provide some more protection to the farmland and to the agriculture industry. So just once again, the only reason that I approached the board today is to let you know that we're still available as a resource if you so would like to use it.
Thank you, Mr. Darrington. We appreciate your comments. Is there anybody else in chambers? Seeing nobody coming forward, I'll go to the Zoom. Again, if you're participating via Zoom and wish to comment on an item, we ask that you go to the Participants tab. At the bottom of that tab, there is a raise hand function. Please hit that, and that'll let us know that you'd like to address this board. If you're on a landline and wish to speak, the way to let us know you want to speak is by punching *9. Again, *9. At this point, I see Molly Erickson has her hand raised, so we'll go ahead and give Ms. Erickson 2 minutes after unmuting her microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Molly Erickson, speaking on behalf of the Open Monterey Project. I just heard Mr. Swanson say that the county planning department has made no progress, zero, none, since last year in the long list of remaining unimplemented policies in the 2010 general plan. My question to the board is, does that bother you? What are you going to do about it? What is the timeline? We are now 10 years into the 2010 general plan. It's halfway through. What are you going to do about it, and how are you going to hold the county planning department accountable? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Erickson. Seeing no other hands raised at this point, I'm going to bring it back to the board, and I see Supervisor Phillips has his hand up. Supervisor Phillips?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank RMA for their presentation. Thank Brandon. But when you look at this, and those of us who are involved in specific projects, when you just look at the Castroville, looking about the Castroville plan being redone, the Moss Landing community plan, how much time our staff is doing on FORA with a short timeline, vacation rentals. And I think we're the worst sometimes at saying, well, let's throw this on, a jump on the hemp program and do that. They got a lot on their plate, and it takes a time like this to realize how much they do have on their plate. I appreciate all the work they're doing. Thank you.
I'm going to quickly go to Mr. Swanson. I know your hand's up, and see if you wanted to respond to any of the comments thus far.
Thank you, Chair Lopez. I did want to just make a couple of responses. First to Mr. Darrington. I appreciate his comments, and we are certainly looking forward to working with his organization. Over the last year, I've been in contact with the Department of Conservation, who granted the county the SALC SALT grant for sustainable ag lands. And they knew that we were short on staff resources. And so we still have that connection and plan on getting back to that work this year in 2020. So we will be reaching out to Mr. Darrington's organization. So I wanted to thank him for that offer. And then secondary to that, I hope it didn't come across my presentation. I thought I was pretty clear, but just to Ms. Erickson's comment about no progress being made on general plan items, I did not say that, or if I did, it was not intended. We did not process anything to completion. However, there was progress made on the DES, on Native American Tribal Resources Panel, landscape ordinance. There are a lot of ordinances and general plan work that progress was made on in 2019. Just none were processed to completion. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. We appreciate that clarification. Supervisor Adams.
Thank you very much. And thanks for all the work that you guys have done on this. I appreciate getting the updates. The only comment that I wanted to make was just kind of a reminder about the Big Sur land use plan and the comments that the Coastal Commission has made about not really wanting to see a lot of tweaking done to that, acknowledging that it really is the gold standard as far as land use plans go. And I think that there's some concern that we don't want to see a whole lot of amendments made that might do something to take it out of the control of the county and put it in control of the Coastal Commission. My hope is that you don't spend a lot of time on that one, but instead focus on things like the short-term rentals and also some of the fire resource protection things that I know that you have on your plate as well.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chair, I can speak to that a little bit if that's okay.
Sure.
Just a brief comment. Certainly, as we all know, the Big Sur land use plan is the gold standard, but I think maybe just polishing that gold and making it even shinier, I think, is the goal of this Big Sur land use plan update. And Mr. Dugan, John Dugan, has been taking the lead on that. He may want to speak a little bit more to it, but my understanding is it's not about a large overhaul, and so the staff is aware of that concern. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to let you know that sometimes even the finest gold can be burnished too much and then it breaks.
Any other members of the board? Seeing no hands going up, I believe this was just receiving a presentation. So Mr. Swanson, on behalf of my constituents, I want to say thank you. I know it's taken us a long time to get Chular into the queue there, and last year you guys did a lot of work to make sure that we started that and found the funding to make sure that that community plan got off the ground. So I want to thank you guys for all the effort you're putting in. We know that we throw a lot on your plate every single week, but we do appreciate all that you and the team there do. So thank you. And with that, we will move into our next item, which is, oops, sorry, I flipped my pages here, item 12, which was continued from April 28th, which is public hearing to consider an appeal by the Open Monterey Project from January 29th, 2020 decision of the Monterey County Planning Commission to approve an application to allow a lot line adjustment merging 3 total lots. So staff for that one will be, I see Mr. Swanson again, as well as Mr. Craig Spencer.
Thank you, sir. Actually, Joe Cedar will be presenting and Craig Spencer will be helping him. I'm just pulling up the presentation on my screen here. I'll run it for Mr. Cedar. All right, Joe, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. Good afternoon, Chair Lopez and Supervisors. I'm Joseph Cedar, planner for the Haley Project, RMA planning file number PLN 180434, and item continued from April 28th, 2020. Next slide. The project site is located at 26226 Isabella Avenue at the intersection of San Antonio Drive in the unincorporated area of Carmel Point, the Carmel Area Land Use Plan and Coastal Zone. The property is zoned medium density residential, 2 units per acre with a design control overlay and an 18-foot height limit. Next slide. The applicant requests approval for a combined development permit to allow a lot line adjustment between 3 legal lots of record, resulting in 2 lots, demolition of an existing single-family dwelling, and the construction of a new 1-story, 3,218 square foot single-family dwelling on the resulting Lot A, the remodel of a second existing single-family dwelling, including the addition of a carport on the resulting Lot B, and development within 750 feet of known archaeological resources. The Planning Commission considered this project on January 29th, 2020, and voted unanimously to approve the project. The decision of the Planning Commission was then appealed, scheduled before the board on April 28th, and then continued to today. Next slide. The property currently encompasses 3 separate legal lots of record, as shown by the red lines. The resulting 2 lots would be reconfigured as shown by the blue line. Next slide. Per this elevation drawing, the proposed dwelling on resulting Lot A would have a lower height than the existing non-conforming dwelling with regard to height, bringing it into compliance with the current height limit of 18 feet. The proposed design would have a similar style to the existing dwelling and would also use similar colors and materials to the existing that are consistent with the residential setting. Next slide. The height of the existing dwelling on resulting Lot B is consistent with current zoning and would not change. The applicant proposes a trellis-style carport to meet the code requirement for 1 covered parking space per lot. Next slide. The county, as lead agency, prepared a draft initial study and mitigated negative declaration. The environmental analysis identified potentially significant impacts to both archaeological and tribal cultural resources, and staff has proposed mitigation measures to reduce the identified impacts to a level of less than significant by requiring the presence of an on-site archaeological monitor and an on-site tribal monitor during all excavation activities. All other standard topics of environmental analysis were found to have less than significant or no impacts. Next slide. Of particular note for this area, the proposed project does not include a basement. As proposed, the soil engineering investigation recommended a 2-foot over excavation and 1-foot scarification involving 120 cubic yards of cut and 40 cubic yards of fill. The amount of proposed excavation is the minimum necessary to prepare the site for development and is the minimum required for adequate building safety design and standards according to the project's geotechnical engineer. Next slide. The applicant also completed additional ground penetrating radar testing in March 2020, which confirmed the negative findings of the archaeologists. Geoprobe borings were drilled to a depth of 4 feet at the locations of any anomalies as shown by the red dots. The GPR surveys and geoprobe borings found no evidence of cultural materials, as well as no evidence of cultural soils or sediments within the project area. Next slide. The appeal raised a number of contentions primarily related to archaeological and cultural resources. These contentions were grouped by county staff into 13 specific contentions in 3 general categories. In summary, the appellant's contentions relate to the adequacy of the mitigation measures, cumulative impacts of the project within the greater Carmel Point area, and the adequacy of county practices and processes. Next slide. In staff's analysis, the project is adequately designed and mitigated to minimize or avoid potential impacts to archaeological and cultural resources at the site. Carmel Point has been substantially developed with single-family residences on relatively small lots. Due to known resources in the vicinity, the county collects site-specific evidence for each development and exercises independent judgment based on the facts and circumstances of each case. The extensive site testing completed on this property indicated that resources are not present and unlikely to be present. However, given the parcel's location in the archaeologically and culturally resource-sensitive Carmel Point area, the reports recommended the presence of monitors during all excavation activities. Therefore, the mitigation measures address the potential situation if resources are found. The mitigation measures are feasible and supported by facts and analysis. They clearly state the requirements, timing of those requirements, responsible parties, and the compliance actions to be performed consistent with the requirements of CEQA. Staff has also been responsive in revising mitigation language to ensure it is more effective in mitigating potential impacts, and has clarified mitigation measure number 1 to require the archaeological monitor to actively observe all soil disturbing activities while present on the site. Next slide, please. There is no evidence in the record that the project may have a significant or cumulatively significant effect on the environment or on resources. Expert technical reports analyzing the site testing completed on this property concluded that resources are not present and unlikely to be present, and the applied measures are more precautionary than preventative. Based on the specific circumstances of the project as proposed, tested, conditioned, and mitigated, there is no substantial evidence that the project would result in a cumulative significant impact. As such, in this case, further environmental review is not warranted nor required per CEQA. Next slide. Regarding county practices and processes, the approved plans are attached to the resolution and are specifically referenced in the resolution. The plans attached to the resolution are kept and maintained by the Resource Management Agency, both electronically and physically. And it is the practice of the RMA to review all subsequent permits, such as building permits, for consistency with these approved plans. Changes made after approval of the plans can and do trigger additional permitting requirements. The mitigations and conditions approved by the hearing body are attached to the final resolution, and each page of the final mitigations and conditions is dated. Therefore, identification of the approved mitigations and conditions is positive and definitive. RMA Planning Services Manager Craig Spencer will now address comments regarding tribal concerns and consultation requirements.
Thank you, Joe. Craig Spencer with Resource Management Agency. As Joe mentioned, I'd just like to go over a couple of things. First, in terms of tribal resource consultation, the county did notify the Ohlone, Costanoan, and Esalen Nation and the Esalen Tribe of Monterey County with respect to carrying out this project. Both tribes requested consultation, and the county consulted with both tribes on this project. As part of the consultation, both tribes identified that this is in the sensitive cultural resource area in Carmel Point, and requested that if development is allowed to continue, which they recognize residential lots have the ability to have residential development on them, that through development that a tribal monitor be present on site. As mentioned by Mr. Sedor, the county did include the requirement for a tribal monitor in the condition. The county has also been in receipt of letters from the applicant and the appellant regarding the need for the Ohlone, Costanoan, and Esalen Nation, otherwise known as Ocean, to be the monitor present on site. And I'd just like to address that briefly. Both tribes are culturally and traditionally affiliated with this territory, Ocean and the Esalen Tribe of Monterey County. Both requested that a tribal monitor be present on site. And the county has drafted a mitigation in coordination with the Planning Commission that allows either one of those tribes to appoint a monitor to be present during excavation. This is during the actual ground disturbance process where a monitor from one or the other tribe would be present to monitor the excavation to ensure that no resources are uncovered during construction. If during grading something is uncovered, then the tribal monitor would have the authority to stop construction and evaluate that find. That's different than if human remains are found. As Mr. Sedor mentioned, it is there's been extensive testing on the site.
Yeah, I did, but I got the answer. I was just calling you to see how many APs went into 344 Salinas Street. They actually put 9 in that little old place.
I think we have somebody.
In 344 Salinas Street. They actually put 9 in that little old place.
Okay. Not sure what happened there.
Well,
but
I'm not sure I can help you with 334 Salinas Street, but please continue.
Thank you, Chair. I'll wrap things up. There is a difference in state law between artifacts and human remains. If artifacts are discovered, in the unlikely event that artifacts are discovered during construction.
Okay, well, that's all I needed, man. I wanted to see what was going on
Give us 1 second here.
with that one because I'm updating my spreadsheet.
Is it Craig's
Okay,
cell
man.
phone?
See you tomorrow. All right.
No, it's the person who's named monitor. They need to be muted.
Yeah.
Okay, we should be good to go. Mr. Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if artifacts are discovered during construction, then the property owner would consult with the tribal monitor on site to develop a plan for the evaluation and disposition of those artifacts. If human remains are discovered pursuant to state law, the county coroner is contacted. The Native American Heritage Commission at the state appoints a most likely descendant, which could be a representative from Ocean or a representative from the Esalen tribe, and the county has no control over that. Any grave goods associated with that burial would be subject to the evaluation between and discussion between the property owner and the most likely descendant. In this case, the only issue is whether or not the Ocean or Esalen tribe monitor construction, and not whether or who is appointed as the monitor or the most likely descendant in the event that human remains are discovered. Right now, the mitigation language in front of you does allow for either one of the tribes to monitor, and that would be subject to the approval of the developer, the property owner, in terms of who monitors that site. Either one of those tribes could comply with that mitigation. So that was just for clarification, and I'll turn it back over to Joe Sedor to conclude.
Thank you, Craig. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, staff recommends the Board of Supervisors deny the appeal of the Open Monterey project from the April 29th, 2020 decision of the Planning Commission. Adopt a mitigated negative declaration pursuant to Section 15074 of the CEQA guidelines. Approve a combined development permit based on the findings and evidence to allow a lot line adjustment, demolition and construction of a single-family dwelling, remodel of a single-family dwelling, including the addition of a 225 square foot carport, and development within 750 feet of known archaeological resources, and adopt a condition compliance and mitigation monitoring and reporting plan. This concludes staff's presentation, and staff is available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sedor. We appreciate your presentation along with Mr. Swanson and Mr. Spencer. At this point, I know we have the appellant participating via Zoom. Am I correct? I don't see her name on the list. She's still in the attendees. It's Molly Erickson. We can move her over. Okay, now you're a participant here, Ms. Erickson, and so we're going to go ahead and give her 10 minutes first. Or let's process here. This is the first appeal that I've done.
Well, Mr. Chairman, so the applicant goes first.
Please.
Sorry, apologies.
My apologies.
No said. I gave some exhibits to the clerk earlier. Maybe we can switch. Okay. Okay. That's it. Yep. So I hope it's a little far to see from here, but hopefully it comes up on your screen. All right, Anthony Lombardo on behalf of the Haleys. I'm going to start by a question Mrs. Haley asked me at the Planning Commission hearing when we were there live, which is, what did we do wrong with this application? I don't understand why this person is attacking us. The answer, of course, as approved by the LUAC with unanimous neighborhood support after they reached out to the neighbors ahead of making this application, and unanimous Planning Commission approval, is they did nothing wrong. The house is located, the two houses are located in that area in Carmel Point where I've circled in the middle of the highly developed area of Carmel Point. As staff mentioned, there are 3 legal parcels there which the Haleys could demolish the homes and build 3 homes. Instead, they're combining 3 lots into 2 and keeping the 2 existing houses. If you go to the next slide, please. The one, oops, that's not in order. The house, there's a small house built in 2002. There we go. Small house on the right side, which was built in 2002. They have to add a carport. That's that little trellised area the staff mentioned in the shaded area on the lower right-hand corner. And then on the left-hand side is the older house, which at one point was a garage that was converted to a home, which is basically uninhabitable, and that one is going to be significantly remodeled, as staff mentioned. Next slide, please. You can see in this photograph, the small house built in 2002 is in the foreground, and that's the one that's going to have a small carport added to one side of it to meet the county's covered parking requirements. The house in the background with the clipped-off peaked roof is the house that's going to be significantly remodeled. Next slide, please. As you can see, the same architectural feature appears in the center of the house. It gives you some idea of the scale of the addition. As I said, it's a very modest house and, in fact, has no basement, as staff mentioned. The Haleys did not ask for a basement. They're only asking to rebuild this house and add a carport to the other house. The reason that a rebuilding this house is necessary, next slide, series of slides, please. The door height going into the living room is 6'1". Next height, next slide. Going into the office, 6'3". Next one. The stairs, which are more like a ladder than a stairs, are a total of 29 inches wide. Next slide. This is the clearance coming up the stairway to the second floor. It has a clearance of 5'4". So anyone who is at the height of over 5'4" either ducks their head or cold cocks themselves going up and down the stairs. And finally, another example, next slide, please. The guest bathroom has a shower opening of 17 inches and the toilet, total wall-to-wall toilet clearance of 24 inches. So this is a remodel that really needs to be done. The appeal is appears to be more an indictment of the county planning and land use process than it has anything to do with the specifics of this application, because there is nothing wrong with what was approved unanimously by the Planning Commission. Next slide, please. There's a question raised by the appellant about the necessity for soil disturbance. The appellant refers to other applications on other lots, not anywhere near this house, that require greater excavation due to the soil conditions on those lots. And what we've included in our information is a site-specific soil investigation and the letter from the soils engineer explaining why this amount of excavation is necessary and why it's correct. Next slide, please. The appellant also questioned the meaning of the word intact archaeological resources, inferring that the archaeologist, the Native American, and the applicant would somehow conspire to destroy archaeological resources so they wouldn't be quote-unquote intact. The archaeologist clarified that the term intact means in the site, not that they are undamaged, as most archaeological remains are. Next. That's the soil report. You can go past that one. You can go to the next slide. Oh, okay. Finally, it was attached to our previous correspondence. There is a letter from the 2 additional archaeologists confirming that the results of the ground-penetrating radar showed, quote, all investigative efforts resulted in no evidence of cultural materials, no evidence of cultural soils or sediments within the parcel. the Phase 2 archaeological presence absence testing, GPR and geoprobing for the project parcels produced negative results. With no archaeological deposits or cultural sediments encountered, Paleo West recommended the project should not be delayed for archaeological concerns and recommends the approved MMRP and MND be implemented and followed. So as staff mentioned, there is no evidence that the Planning Commission erred in its decision. In fact, I have to say the Planning Commission went out of its way to try and satisfy the appellant. The hearing was conducted. The Commission asked if additional conditions could be added. The applicant agreed. The item was trailed. It came back in the afternoon, which the appellant did not, and read into the record the exact language of the additional conditions, which the Commission felt were added not out of necessity, but in order to satisfy the appellant, so an appeal would not be filed to the Board of Supervisors. Unfortunately, that didn't occur. So there's no new evidence that indicates the Commission or the staff has made an error, and we would respectfully request that the Board deny the appeal, uphold the Planning Commission's decision, and the support of the LUAC, the unanimous support of the neighbors around the project, and the Planning Commission's overwhelmingly positive comments and decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lombardo. At this point, we'll go over to Molly Erickson, representative of the Open Monterey Project. Should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Molly Erickson, on behalf of the Open Monterey Project. This is a much more modest project, certainly, than the projects that have come before the board recently. The problem is those much more invasive and large projects that have been before the board have exposed serious problems with the county planning conditions and processes, specifically with regard to protection of resources at Carmel Point, protection of archaeological resources, and protection of Native American tribal resources. Why is this important? Because resources have been found all over that point as recently as last year, and they've been found both deep and shallow, and many of them have been shallow, especially in areas that have not yet been excavated. However, as recently as last summer, 4 sets of remains were found at a fairly shallow location for digging for a gas line at a property that was already developed with a house. So to say that there's already a house there, therefore there are no resources, that makes no sense. And to say that you can have lighter weight conditions, that also makes no sense. Now, the board addressed this not with regard to the 3 projects on Valley View and Isabella, the Pietro Emerson projects that are currently pending before the California Coastal Commission. Those are the 3 basement projects. And also, the board also looked at this with regard to the Skeen and Chang project, where 720 cubic yards were excavated without the appropriate and required monitor. And the board, it seemed to me, was certainly concerned about this issue and made a referral in October of 2019, specifically for the planning department to look into this issue, to try to make the penalties, enhance the penalties, and have a much better process to prevent harm before it happens. It has been 7 months since that board referral, which was made by Supervisors Alejo and Adams, and the county planning department has done nothing. In the meantime, the county planning staff is processing applications that require these very monitors and require excavation, which are all getting approved without the benefit of the enhanced processes that the board directed be brought to the board 7 months ago. As far as this particular project, these conditions certainly could and should be stronger and clearer. They are workable if they are improved and strengthened, as stated in the appeal at length, and I will not go over them here, although I'm certainly happy to answer any questions. The conditions do not comply with the NAHC recommendations that I attached. I heard that one condition has been revised, but I heard 2 different versions of it. When the staff oral presentation made a comment about how certain amount was excavation, that the monitors would only be present for excavation. They did not say that they would be present for scarification. Now, when else at a later time, the staff has orally stated that the monitors would actively observe all soil disturbing activities. So I don't have the language. These revisions have not been presented to me. So that is an unknown. As far as the claim about Ocean being present on site, that it be Ocean and not the other tribal representatives, that is not, staff spent a lot of time on that issue. It is simply not an accurate reflection of the comments made in the appeal. So in conclusion, and I appreciate all of your time today, I think the issue is that the conditions can be strengthened with issues we know are problems. We know, you know, the planning department knows, that should be strengthened to clarify and to address these loopholes and gaps. Then this project can certainly go forward. But unfortunately, the planning department has either deliberately or accidentally misread the points on the appeal and simply slammed the drawbridge down and saying, no, we are, you know, whatever, portcullis, whatever the right metaphor is, and said, no, we are not going to have stronger conditions. And these applicants sound like they would be amenable to the clearer conditions. They sound like they are willing to proceed with good, strong conditions. So I am puzzled as to why we can simply not clarify and enhance and strengthen the conditions so these folks can move forward with their project. Be happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any responses from the appellant? You have 3 minutes and 45 seconds.
Thank you. I wish we knew what stronger and clearer meant. It's been 2 months. We've been unable to elicit any response as to any specific criticism of the conditions or suggested language for the amendment to the conditions. The appellant feels that the county fine structure for violating conditions of approval is not adequate. I've asked repeatedly for a number that the appellant would feel was an adequate punishment for that occurrence. I've been unable to obtain that number. So there's really nothing the Haleys can do at this time. There is no NAHC letter or recommendation related to this project. The letter that you were sent is for a different project. The tribal consultation that staff mentioned resulted in conditions which exactly mirror all of the conditions that are being requested of you today. If the board feels that having Ocean be the monitor is a requirement, which it is legally not, the applicant is fine with that. If the board feels that turning the artifacts over to Ocean, if any are found, is desirable, although it is not a legal requirement, in fact, is illegal, it violates state law, the applicant's fine with that. And if the board wants a greater fine for violating the conditions, which I assure you this applicant has no intention of doing, especially since there's no resources under this property, the applicant's fine with that. But I've heard a statement years ago saying it's hard to negotiate against yourself. And in this case, we have had none, zero suggestions or proposals from the appellant other than these continuing indictments of the county's planning process. So we've done all we can do. We'd respectfully request you deny the appeal and approve the project. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I respond?
Yes, Ms. Erickson, you have 5 minutes and 8 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will not take all that time, but thank you anyway. As far as the claim that Mr. Lombardo has been unable to elicit something or other, whatever he said about, I'm not going to cut a private deal. My clients are not going to cut a private deal. My clients are not interested in working that out. My clients are interested in solving the problem with the planning department. The planning department did not once contact me or my clients with any effort to go over any of the questions and any of the appeal points, which I think we were fairly detailed in the comments, and we would be happy to work with the planning department on those conditions and mitigations. But they did not once contact me at any point other than to say when the appeal hearing would be. So I think that is really the nutshell, is the process needs to be fixed. The standard conditions need to be fixed. Nobody wants to battle these projects out on a case-by-case basis. If there are projects that are workable and the conditions work, then let's make the conditions right and let's let them proceed. But it makes no sense to fight this on a case-by-case basis and bring them all before the board. This is a de novo hearing. It is not a basis of who made a mistake and who didn't make a mistake. The question is the board comfortable with the process, with the way the planning department has handled this? Does the board want the planning department to perhaps look a little better at its conditions, including the ones which we already know the board does, including the ones with regard to accountability for monitoring? So this is a pretty straightforward, should be a pretty straightforward process. Unfortunately, planning has simply refused to engage in any kind of a dialogue with anyone other than Mr. Lombardo. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to take it back to staff to answer any questions, and then I'm going to go to public for comment before bringing it back to our board. Mr. Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Craig Spencer with the RMA. Staff would like to respond to a number of comments. One is there was some allegations that county staff was basing our determinations on the fact that the site is already developed and or the excavation would be shallow. That is not the case. The county staff required multiple archaeological investigations, which included ground penetrating radar, ground probes, and surface reconnaissance and background information that all returned a negative result. The depth of the excavation was identified based on the geotechnical recommendation. I'd also like to point out, in terms of stronger condition language, county staff has 3 times improved and revised the mitigation language. We prepared an initial study, circulated it for public comment, and got none. And then we went to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission recommended that staff take a recess, develop some stronger mitigations based on testimony, which we did. And when we were preparing for the board hearing, there were comments submitted that, as Mr. Sedor mentioned, we did take into account and strengthened and modified our mitigation measures again to ensure that the project mitigation measures are effective for the purposes of this project. Finally, in terms of the referral on the penalties, RMA staff is in the works and will be returning to the board in the near future with some more information on the bigger issue. But in terms of this project, county staff is recommending that the board deny the appeal and approve the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. Any other members of staff wish to respond at this point? Seeing nobody unmuting, I'll go ahead and take it out to the public for comment. Anybody in chambers wish to make a comment at this point? They have 2 minutes to do so. Seeing nobody coming forward, I'll take it to the Zoom. If there's anybody via Zoom who wishes to comment on this item, please use the Participants tab in order to raise your hand. If you're on a cell phone and wish to do so, it's *9. Seeing no hands going up, I'll bring it back to the board. Any supervisor wish to comment on this item? I see Supervisor Phillips' hand has gone up. Supervisor Phillips.
I got to say, I haven't seen an appeal that had less merit than this. You had 9 out of 9 of the Planning Commission approved this. Even then, they worked to add anything else that the appellant apparently wished, and we still end up in appeal. I guess my biggest concern is the appeal itself, in that the letter comments, but then the letter, May 4th letter from the appellant's attorney, they spend 98% of the letter is castigating our planning department. The county planning has refused simple points and has not understood them. The county approval documents are often so confusing and plan are often detached. And as an additional and separate concern about reliability of our county planning application. The county planning forms are filled with material gaps and loopholes. I have pointed out the loophole to the county, and the county planning should have fixed them long ago. So I'm kind of concerned that we're using the appellate process on a case just to carry on this vindictive attack on the planning department. So I will support a motion to support staff a recommendation to deny the appeal.
I'll second that.
So I've got a motion and a second, but I'll continue conversation. Supervisor Adams.
Thank you. Thanks. In fact, I don't know that we came for questions because I have a question as well as comments. And the question that I wanted to ask of staff is that it's my understanding that the Planning Commission had a lengthy discussion about some of the concerns that are simply being raised again now in the appeal, and that the modifications were made to the mitigations, the findings. And I just want to be sure that all of those mitigation measures that were addressed at the Planning Commission are actually included in the project, in the comments that are being brought forward today. Those changes have been made, isn't that correct? The changes that were made from the Planning Commission at the Planning Commission meeting, Brandon or Joe?
Through the chair, this is Joe Sedor.
Yes, Joe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, Supervisor Adams, those changes that were recommended, or revisions to the mitigation measures that were recommended by the Planning Commission, have been incorporated into the revised mitigation measures, as well as subsequent revisions that have been made that have further clarified and amplified and strengthened the mitigation measures based on information or comments provided by the appellant. So again, to answer your question, those changes have been incorporated and strengthened even further.
Thank you very much. There are so many things about this that I am very appreciative of. Number one, I'm appreciative that the applicant hasn't proposed a basement in the project, like so many of the other projects in that area that I have opposed. I also appreciate that they went over and above and conducted the additional investigation with the ground penetrating radar survey, since the Planning Commission felt that maybe there wasn't, that the auger boreholes weren't, enough. We just continue to have projects that are going to come before us in the Carmel Point area, and there is an outstanding need to better address how the archaeological investigations are conducted, and to address the tribal resource concerns. I'm hoping that I know the Planning Commission has a newly formed Tribal and Archaeological Resources Committee that are already working on the issues, and that they'll come up with recommendations to improve the practices that can be done consistently in all the projects. Also, I'm looking forward to the staff coming back with on the referral that I made with Supervisor Alejo to strengthen the penalties and the consequences for bad actors who may violate the conditions of approval or not properly follow the monitoring protocols, which in fact the Haleys have done to an exemplar way. But I do not believe that this project proposes any risks, and I appreciate the care that's been taken by the Planning Commission, by the staff, and the applicant to strengthen and clarify the mitigations to protect the tribal and the other cultural resources. So in my position, I would recommend denial of appeal and approve this project as well.
Thank you, Supervisor Adams. Supervisor Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, so this issue of having a requirement that tribal monitors be present, archaeological monitors be present, we fairly routinely have these conditions, and they are sometimes, if not often, we've had experience where those conditions are not adhered to. What is it that's different about the way that these conditions are written that gives us the assurance that this guidance will be followed this time when it hasn't been followed in the past with similar, at least conditions that look similar to me?
Mr. Chair, I was sorry. This is Brandon Swanson. I was waiting to see if Mr. Spencer was going to answer first. I hate cutting people off on Zoom. It's hard. You can't get the body language here.
Go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Parker, good question. So there were enhancements, as Mr. Sedor pointed out. We brought in language from the appellant's suggestion of changing language like monitors on site to add language such as actively monitor during ground disturbance. So making it more clear what the monitors have to do while they're there, making that a little more clearly. Obviously, it goes without saying that conditions, regardless of how well they're written, will sometimes not be followed. Same thing with codes in the Monterey County Code. That's why we have a code compliance division, is to take care of those issues. So we can't guarantee or make everyone follow every condition in code every time. But every time we do bring these types of projects forward, we do try to make the conditions and the mitigations stronger from what we learn every time. And that's part of what will be coming forward next month. We actually have it on the advanced schedule next month at the board for our referral to bring back the archaeological monitoring conversation. Other things that have been done to these mitigations over time to make them stronger is to be more specific about what happens when things are found on site. We've added specific language about when hand digging needs to happen versus when mechanical excavation can happen, depending on when things are found, whether they're just pottery or tribal artifacts, not even necessarily human remains, because if human remains, anytime that's found, there's specific state guidelines of what happens at that point. But to your question about how do we make sure that people follow our conditions, I think if we had a way to make sure everyone followed every condition every time, we would certainly love that. But we try our best every time to make these as understandable and actionable as possible. We've also been talking internally about methods that, as we're going out on our inspections, cross-training our staff to be aware of what's supposed to be going on site. And so those will be conversations we'll have when we come back next month with the archaeological monitor referral as well, how we can use the resources we have to better make sure that people are adhering to the conditions of approval that we put on projects. So it's kind of a long-winded answer. It's a complicated one, so hopefully that answered your question.
I get, yes, there's something there, but I guess there are two things that I wonder about that seem fairly obvious, particularly with something like this that has been so problematic for us in the past. Is there a requirement that a member of county staff, whoever would be appropriate, be on site with the monitors to also ensure that that happens? So that's one thing I can think of that might be helpful in this and future cases. The other is making sure that we have a penalty for violation that actually is a penalty, rather than what we have found in the past to be something that actually creates an incentive for people to not engage with these monitors. And so it's great that we're having something come next month, but that's about a month too late for this situation. And so I'm just wondering what we've done maybe along those lines to help in this case.
So in this specific case, there is no requirement for a county staff member to be on site during excavation. That's just not something we have done in the past. Certainly that's at the discretion of the board if they want to direct that, but we do not have that as part of these conditions right now to dedicate a staff member to the site during all ground disturbing. Obviously we have limited resources and our code enforcement and building teams are spread thin as it is. Secondary to the penalties right now are what we have in our code right now and what we are able to enforce. But certainly that's what we'll be talking about next month. The building inspectors, I will say that while we don't have people there that can be there the full time right now, building inspectors are on site. And like I said, we're having conversations internally about cross-training staff to at least make them aware of other conditions, so the building people are aware of planning conditions when they're on site and they can kind of be eyes on the ground. So we're aware of that, and we're trying to operate in our construct of limited resources as best we can.
Thank you. That makes sense. So I have to say that from what I can see in the materials, This applicant is sensitive to the design issues in the area, to, obviously doing the pre-soil disturbing testing that is prudent in this area. And I don't necessarily think that a more significant penalty would be necessary in this case, but I wonder if the maker of the motion and its seconder might be open to adding to the conditions that if the tribal or archaeological monitor is discovered to not have been present at the times that they were supposed to be, that the penalty be twice the estimated cost of what that monitor would have cost to have on site.
Is that a friendly amendment?
It's a question to the maker and seconder of the motion.
I wouldn't accept that. It's not acceptable to me.
Okay, so was that it for questions, Supervisor Parker?
Yes.
Okay, I see Mr. Spencer. Did you have a response to one of those questions before we go to Supervisor Alejo?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Craig Spencer with RMA. I just wanted to add to what Brandon was saying on a more technical level. The mitigations are in parts. The mitigation monitoring and tribal resource monitoring mitigation requires that the applicant provide an agreement with a designated tribe prior to the issuance of permits. So they have to enter into an agreement with the tribe before we will release building permits. They also have to record and approve a mitigation monitoring and reporting agreement that essentially says that they are agreeing to the conditions that are being proposed. And obviously the proposed amendment and the discussion is within the purview of the board, but I just wanted to clarify on a technical standpoint that if conditions are not complied with, they would be in violation of the county code as well as the county permit, and the county could take enforcement actions.
Supervisor Alejo.
Thank you. I think enough has been said. I just wanted to very briefly add that I think this applicant has taken the necessary steps, and even some additional changes were properly made at the Planning Commission. So I also question the merits of this appeal. Everyone has the right to do so, though. But certainly when there's been adequate changes done at the Planning Commission level, and there was a unanimous vote to approve this, I just don't see any compelling arguments to not follow those changes and the decision made at the Planning Commission. So I'm gonna support denying the appeal. I'm gonna support the motion, of course, as a seconder, but I just wanted to put that on record that I just didn't see strong arguments articulated here today of why we should make a change from what the Planning Commission adequately addressed.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Phillips.
Yeah, I responded to Supervisor Parker's suggestion, but I maybe we should have asked the applicant if they objected to a fine of twice the amount if for some reason they violated something. They've been so reasonable before, maybe they agree to that. I don't know. I just throw that out as a thought before we take the final vote.
Mr. Lombardo.
Chair Anthony Lombardo on behalf of the applicant. Yeah, in answer to Supervisor Parker's question, yes, that was the response I was trying to get from the appellant, is what would be acceptable. And yes, this applicant, I promise you, will not make that mistake. And yes, that is acceptable to us to double the fee.
I want to go quickly to Wendy Stremlin. I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. I'm just listening in, and I think there may be a concern about increasing the penalty on an ad hoc basis, because my understanding is that the penalty is set pursuant to the county code, which is by ordinance. And so in part, that I think is part of the reason for coming back with the board referral to take a legislative action to change the penalty structure.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly go to Les Gerard.
Thank you. I do appreciate Ms. Strimling's comments, but I think in this case, with the applicant agreeing, I think it can be implemented.
So Supervisor Phillips, with that information, the floor is yours on what you'd like to do with your motion.
I so move and I accept the friendly amendment of Supervisor Parker.
Supervisor Alejo, does your second stand?
Yes, I support the amended motion.
Thank you, Supervisors.
So I just want to say again, I do believe this applicant, well, not again, for the first time, this applicant's gone above and beyond. And I think spending this much time on an item like this when somebody's done everything they can to get this done right, I think it was really unfortunate that it wound up at this point. But at this point, I'm happy to support the motion. I have a motion and a second. I'm going to call for a roll call vote.
Supervisor Alejo?
Aye.
Supervisor Phillips?
Aye.
Supervisor Parker?
With thanks to the maker and seconder, aye.
Supervisor Adams?
And thanks to the amender, aye.
And Chair Supervisor Lopez.
Thank them all. Aye. Okay, so I'm going to go to Les Gerard to see if there's anything that we need to read out of closed session on besides what was done at lunch.
There is nothing additional to report out, Chair.
Thank you so much. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.